Welcome. My name is John Eaton, and I live in the neighborhood, and most of you I think know me or have met me at some point or another. My wife is also over here, Cindy. I was asked to put something together for this evening to kind of impart some information about the history of Northcrest. So this is kind of the best I can do, based off of what I know. I'm sure that there's inaccuracies. I'm sure that some of you and a lot of you probably have, especially Ellie, has a lot of information that I don't have. So hopefully you'll get with me afterwards and just correct me. Otherwise, if you guys have any questions or anything, feel free to raise your hand. You can interrupt me at any time, maybe, and we'll just take it from there. So basically, this is a history of Northcrest, and to give you an idea of the way I get it organized, I really have it laid out from the way that we were exposed to this neighborhood, sort of what we heard, the things that we knew, and then over time the different things that happened that provided better and better information. So I think you'll find it interesting. There's a bunch of stuff in here that I don't think anyone has seen, because I have a lot of stuff that I've never posted or anything. I've been very busy for the last few years, so I haven't really done any updates on the site. You guys probably know that. Anyway, here we go. Okay, so the first part is just a little bit about us and our story. This was the first house that we purchased in Northcrest. It was on Thornwood. It's 3402 Thornwood Drive.
3401.
3401. So the story about this is Cindy, one of Cindy's friends, who also became one of my friends, had kind of told us about this neighborhood. We were looking, at that time we were living in Clarkston, Georgia, which is right near the DeKalb Farmers Market. Kind of this little town. We lived in a little 1,000-square-foot house, and I had a lot of crap, and when I moved in with Cindy, the house just wasn't big enough. We were maintaining a big warehouse space just to store my crap. So it just wasn't a good idea. We started looking, we looked all over the place, we couldn't find anything that we liked. Everything was weird. Some of the houses we looked at had like dungeon rooms in the basement. I mean, if you had seen everything, we could just, we could go on and tell stories forever on that stuff. We were kind of over here in this neighborhood, and we ate at this place, I think it's El Matador. Is that the name of that place?
Terrible.
Wasn't very good. And when we pulled out, we were coming back on Chimley Tucker Road, and we saw the sign for Northcrest Drive, and we're like, hey, Northcrest Drive, let's drive down there. That's a neighborhood that we heard about. So we drove down, and there was a sign that said for sale. And so it was sort of that second entrance in, right on, I think it's what, Hartwood?
Yeah, Hartwood.
And,
North Haven.
North Haven.
You're fired.
Okay. And we drove straight down, and this house was for sale right at the bottom of sort of like the hill. So if you continued on that road, and it would go right down our driveway pretty much. And people have tried to do that before too. I think somebody took out a mailbox one time. I think it was before we.
So we bought the first house we saw for sale sign.
Yeah.
Back in '98.
And it ended up being a really hot market. I think it had only been listed for like a week or maybe that weekend. And we gave them, I think, full asking price. No, we negotiated some on it. But he accepted it, and this is what we got. Even with this, that right around 2,000 square feet, because it doesn't have the sub basement, it's just straight up tri-level. It still wasn't quite enough space, so I put in a little shed in the back, and that held all the gardening stuff. And then I built out the studio kind of off to one side.
Oh, nice.
And it was kind of an interesting project, and I hated leaving it because what happened. Okay, so I'll transition into this. These are some of the things that we heard when we first moved into the neighborhood. We heard that the neighborhood was kind of founded by a company called P&H. I have here Howard Hardrath and Paul Edwards. Those are the actual partners. But we heard everything, like the names were all over the place. It could be, instead of Howard, it could be Harvey, for instance. Like somebody said, some Paul Harvey guy. The other thing that we kind of heard was that they were used car salesmen. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that or not, but I thought that was kind of interesting. And then And then the other thing that we heard was this guy, Paul, who was the salesperson. I forgot he told me this. I think it was like Mary that used to be up on Eagle Rock. She basically said, yeah, that guy was really good looking and he would just charm those women. And, you know, and the stories we got from her were really interesting. So when this neighborhood was sort of in its very beginnings, a lot of the wives were stay-at-home wives. Their husbands all worked for Eastern or Delta, or they were engineers or whatever. And they would come home in the afternoon and they would have their martinis, you know, kind of ready for them. And the wives would just kind of walk to each other's houses, and it sounded like they just got drunk all the time. It really was one of those types of neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Cocktail party.
Yeah. There was a baby who told me that there was actually a lot of them had like in the help colored maids, and there was a bus that would drop them off at like 9 o'clock and pick them up at 5.
So anyway, this is what we heard.
Those were the days.
Yeah.
Okay, so our favorite house was one that we found by accident. Cindy and I used to walk through the neighborhood. We had a 2 to 3 mile path that kind of wound around and made a big circle and then ended up back on Thornwood. And one day we just kind of decided on a whim to go down Lorry Lane. It was a street we hadn't gone down. We saw this house and we were like just floored. You know, I don't know if you guys have been on the street, but it just became our favorite house. And through the course of that, we met the 2 owners. It was a gay couple that had lived there for 35 years. They were the second owners. They bought it from a woman, I think the family's last name was Carter. And they had some kind of strange stories that they would tell that we would hear anecdotally. Like one of the stories was that, oh yeah, this belonged to the daughter of Lauren Green, and they had this built. And, I mean, it was just all kinds of weird stuff. You know, most of the neighbors just called it the Butterfly House. So that's how we came to know it. It ended up going to a state. Jerry was a cancer survivor, and it finally came out of remission. It consumed him, and then his partner very quickly succumbed, like within a few months, shortly after that. We had kind of known them a bit, and then we got to know the executor of the estate, and when it finally came up for sale, we kind of...
It never did.
It never did. We negotiated.
Yeah.
And we basically said how much you want for it, and we paid it.
And we didn't ask for any repairs.
And unfortunately for us, because it was such a step. So right around that time, that was about 2002-ish, I started really thinking about, you know, the house, who designed it, who were the architects, you know, all the usual stuff. If you're very geeky like me, you would naturally ask yourself. And I started accumulating all this stuff. I was taking lots of pictures. I said, I'll just throw it all online. So I bought this domain, Northcrest Modern, and I started documenting everything. I kind of laid all of this out. And for you guys that don't know me, you know, I do software development professionally. This was sort of right in my wheelhouse as kind of a hobbyist project. Right now I've got, I think, 15 different blogs. I don't contribute to all of them all the time, but I do like to write a lot, and I'm just pretty geeky about that. So the renderings that are on the site, there are 6 primary images that are in the brochure. I use those, and then for some of the additional models, I just rendered them myself. So I just drew those. I don't know what else I have in here. Oh yeah, I talked a little bit about Cindy. If you look, there's a call out for her on the home site because she pays for the hosting fees, you know, hosting and bandwidth. Very nice of her. So she's the only one that gets any kind of advertising.
Thanks.
Okay.
Use those advertisements.
You're welcome. So it was interesting. Once I put up the site, a lot of things started to happen. It seemed that there were a lot of people that were starting to look at the neighborhood. There was a lot of kind of excitement about getting back into this, you know, what we now have heard called mid-century modern. You know, in 2004, it was just sort of at the beginning. There were a number of articles. I have copies of all of these in case anyone is interested in seeing any of them. Almost all of them are still available online, or I've got hard copy. So you can kind of see it started out with Frank Mullen, who unfortunately died of cancer a few years ago, but and then Daniel Troppi, who lived in Amanda and Rick's house. He was really big on self-promotion, so some of that kind of detailed into that. He was an artist, so you know he was constantly kind of promoting himself. So a lot of the interviews and stuff were around him. Not that there's anything wrong with it. I mean, it's great for us. It's great for our neighborhood. Anyway, all of this stuff happened up through about 2006. And then I started getting information. I started getting a lot of info from neighbors that I hadn't heard. For instance, I had heard about David Latimer because one of the other neighbors said, yeah, David Latimer's dad was out in San Francisco and he really liked this house plan and he brought it back and he's responsible for all the moderns in Northcrest. That was what I had heard. It sounds more like his father really liked that floor plan. It's sort of the largest floor plan that we've got, where the house is sort of turned sideways and then extends off, and it's got this nice basement and everything. So he may be responsible for that. I'm not really sure. There's no evidence of that floor plan in any of the developments prior to Northcrest, so that could be true. I just don't know. David McCowan wrote me an email, and it sounded like, you ever get one of those crazy emails? Like, yeah, the guys that built this place still live in the neighborhood. They're in some hidden area. That's what it sounded like. So I just kind of went, and I kind of ignored it. Come to find out, he was actually right. So it's kind of interesting. And then Chuck Hunt reached out to me. I think most of you know his wife, Elsa, and also I think it's her parents or her dad that lives in the neighborhood. Chuck used to be the president of the Northcrest Association.
He recently.
I know he was really
Oh, he did? Oh, I didn't know.
He's recently died. He
Oh,
died.
I didn't know. I knew that he was very sick.
Elsa's father?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, very sad.
Felix just passed away?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's true.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's what Elsa
He always
today.
stopped and flirted with me.
He flirted with everybody. One of the interesting things that I got, I actually got the phone number for Howard Hardrath, and I tried calling it a couple of times, and it always went to the answering machine. No one ever, replied. So I found out later why he didn't, but that's one of those little tidbits that I didn't realize at the time. Chris Bowen called me up and he basically said, I like what you've done on the site, I have some information. And his was like one of the first 2 or 3 houses built in the neighborhood. I met with him, he was preparing his house for sale. He's on like sort of the end house on Hartwood, right, on the left, right? And he gave me one of those plat maps that you see that are floating around. And he explained what that was for, which I'll get to in a second. And then Laura Riley contacted me about the A-frame because she just moved in around the corner, and she had that really nifty AJC article, which I'll show in a minute. There's the plat. So basically, when you look at this plat, it's kind of interesting because it has all of the original homeowners listed on it with their phone numbers. And a handful of the phone numbers are still good. That's what's,
Oh, that's pretty
And there's
so bizarre.
the 4 area codes.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So basically all of these, if you look on, some of them have little dollar figures. Basically, P&H donated the property that the pool is on, and then they raised money. They went around and got contributions from everybody who wanted to be in the pool kind of association. So everyone contributed like $250 or a little bit more. And so when you look on this, it kind of shows how much they contributed. And I think that this is a lot of the reasons why they didn't open up the pool to the rest of the neighborhood, because these guys kind of felt like, we paid for this pool, at least that's what I think.
Hey,
Yeah,
John,
there's some of that.
was it your understanding that it was the developers that went around and did that,
Yeah.
or was it the garden club that did that?
It wasn't the garden club, it was sort of just like a loose association
Yeah.
of people that raised the money.
Of garden club members and other neighbors.
It had,
Yes.
I think that there were some garden club members.
Yeah,
I don't
Doris
know.
was a big founder of it, and a few other of her friends from my
I
understanding.
knew she kind of helped head that up. I was just curious who those people were that.
All I know was
started.
Chris, Chris's dad was actually in charge of this. So apparently he's got the master of this somewhere. So the actual rendering still exists.
In 1964, right? So what percentage of the neighborhood was like developed at this time? Because my house wasn't even built.
You
then.
see it right there. So
Yeah, I mean,
you
there's a
see
lot
the-
of empty
You see the
lots
blank
there.
spots?
Yeah.
It says
There are a
lot,
lot of
lot. And actually, some of these roads have changed names. Like this road right here, I think becomes Hidden Acres. And if you look early,
Actually, no, see, it doesn't show my house, Beach Hill.
see right here. See
Beach
this
Hill
red?
isn't on there.
Yeah.
Because,
It starts right there.
yeah, yes, it does.
Is Linda on there, or is that?
No, this predates all of that. Now, apparently they had already negotiated for all of the land, and they had started raising that funding and they were starting to pay for it. But at this stage, this is as far as the development had gone. Okay, so 1964 Dixie Living, AJC. This is from Laura, who I guess the previous owner had given it to the previous owner, who had given it to the previous owner, going all the way back to the original owner. And it just kind of stayed with the house. I don't know who's got it now, but it was kind of an interesting article because if you read it, basically the way the A-frames are made in our neighborhood, they're not really A-frames. They're sort of like partial A-frames stuck on a flat roof house. And this particular owner didn't like that. It bothered her design sensibilities. And she said, no, if you're going to build this, I want the roof to go all the way to the ground. So if you look, this one extends all the way to the ground, which you can't really see from the street now. But it's kind of interesting. So that's the title, Partial A, Not Enough.
Yeah, it's actually the A on the right side because,
Oh yeah, you're talking about the extended piece.
yeah, the extended piece. Because I know Virginia's and mine stop on that side. It's like an
And it just
A and a half.
integrated in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This one sticks out a little bit if you look at it, the way the
looks like
door
it
and
does.
everything is.
Yeah.
John, did you know that one of that one of the houses in the neighborhood was used in a duck and cover video?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a copy of that
That's the one.
somewhere.
That's
Yeah,
the
this is
one.
the
That's the
one.
one?
Oh my God.
Yeah, I have some additional info on that too that we can talk about as they start rounding it up towards the end. Is this taking too long? This is on North Lake Trail. It's on North Lake Trail. Okay, so in 2006, kind of based off of the Northcrest Modern website, Cindy and I became very involved with Docomomo, which is an international organization that has to do with the preservation of the modernist movement. It's about the documentation and preservation of the modernist movement. We volunteered to put our house on a tour. It was the first Docomomo Atlanta tour. So the very first modern tour that we ever had, our house was on that. So when people ask you, hey, when is your house going to be on the tour? It's like, we've already had it on the tour. So that's the excuse. There were 3 houses, the Surgott's house, ours, and who was the third? I don't remember. Somebody who's gone now.
We've got the thing, the flyer, right?
We don't have the flyer, but I've got a digital copy of this. Remember, I asked for one of these and they had handed them all out. I was
It's
like,
on the next page if you took a shot of it. But no, I guess not.
no. Okay, so then in 2007, like I said, we were involved with Docomomo, and a guy named Richard Clues, who works for the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, had done a big research project around the development of the ranch home. And it was a really interesting presentation. This was his first presentation. It was at Design Within Reach. And the reason I put this up here is because one of the things that I had sort of heard about was this guy named Tally, who was apparently one of the original partners. Well, nobody could give me any more info on it. And so we were listening to this guy lecture, and all of a sudden he started talking about Walter Tally and Northwoods and how significant his contribution was. That was the first multi-use kind of community development in the state, is at Northwoods, just inside the perimeter. And when I heard Tally, I was like, that's who it is! And of course later I was like criticized because I made that outburst, but it was
That connection
anyway,
became real,
and so that connected all the dots, right? And it also gave me some questions that I could ask later. Okay, and then we start getting into where it starts getting interesting. Brian Roboy, who lives in town, or lives in our neighborhood, had proposed writing an article with a sort of professional photography for Atomic Ranch magazine. Now, we'd already been in Atomic Ranch previously, because Daniel had put a picture of your house. If you look at Atomic Ranch, they have like shots of homes with like little blurbs, and so that was the very first mention. This was an in-depth article. It's actually very well written. It's pretty good. This kind of caused a snowball effect. That's when I got contacted by Ray Edwards, who ends up being the son of Paul Edwards, and he happens to live in the neighborhood, in a weird house, in a hidden part of the neighborhood that nobody knows about. Yeah. So, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. I was also contacted by Dorothy Hardrath, who is the cousin's wife kind of thing, who said, oh, I just found out about this and I bought all the copies off the shelf, and I contacted Howard and he's really interested in talking to you, and et cetera, et cetera. Then Cindy got a call from this guy named Sam Troutman, who is Buddy Hardrath. Buddy is Howard's brother, who at the time also lived in the neighborhood and we didn't even know. And so it was his daughter's husband contacted us and basically said, yeah, why don't you come by? Why don't you come by Howard's house and meet him? And we were like, okay. Now, what were we going to do about that? But before I get to there, I interviewed Ray Edwards. He came over to the house. We sipped wine. Notice I said his wife, question mark. I don't remember her name. I don't think that they were married, but I'm not really sure. I wasn't going to pry or anything. But he gave me some interesting info. He talked about where his house is and why nobody knows about it. It's actually in the Azalea Apartments, the Azalea Ridge Apartments.
Are there two houses there?
There's 2 houses there. So the only way to get over there is you have to get in through the gate, which is kind of interesting, right?
And then the driveway's about that wide.
Yeah, actually the Pleasant Hill side, I think.
It's on, you can access it from Pleasant Hill, and if you go down to Valley Bluff dead ends and makes a hard left. That used to continue through the apartments. And so what happened is when they built those apartments, this is what he told me. That was the last project that P&H did in the neighborhood. They had already done quite a bit of the development through the different phases of the neighborhood. And they kind of decided, well, what are we going to do now? Well, let's build some apartments. So they built out what was called the Checkmate Apartments. And it had a lot of kind of interesting features. And there were 4 lots that were stuck back there that were on a bluff. They were all giant rock, and they would have had the blast to build on. And so they divided them up, and Howard took 2 and Paul took 2. Eventually, each of them built a home. So there's 2 houses that are stuck back there. One of them is an A-frame. The interesting thing, Ray and his sister Lynn, guess what street there is named after them? So he kind of told me, because I talk about how it looked like the neighborhood was built in phases. He kind of remembered a little bit about that. He told me it was kind of interesting because he was a kid and they let him like drive the equipment around, and so he kind of grew up while the neighborhood was being built. So a lot of people knew him. I asked about the relationship. He basically said that Howard was more of the finance guy, so he was sort of on the money side, and Paul was more on the like general contracting side, kind of project planning and building everything out. Let's see, in Northcrest East, he told me that one of the reasons why the houses changed so much, they sort of have the same floor plan but they look different, is because as they were parceling out the properties over there, Howard's brother Buddy started getting involved, and Buddy would tweak things out. So a lot of the homes that are over there weren't really built by P&H, even though it was financed by P&H. There was 2 different parts of the business. There was the building part and there was the finance part. But Buddy was the one that was sort of taking over, at that point. And these guys, when they started building the apartments, they were kind of already thinking about retirement, because these were already second careers for both of them.
So, John, didn't P&H buy all the land, which they sold some of it off to Concord Manor and Hidden Acres?
Yeah, what they did, I don't know if you remember because I asked about this. Basically, you think about how big our development is. There's 650 or so homes. When you have all of these lots, you have to pay for those lots even if nothing is happening on them. And all of these guys were sort of, a lot of the builders in this area around Chamblee, they all kind of knew each other. And they kind of come from this background where somebody would go in and they would have a big development and they would piecemeal out some of the lots to some of their friends who would all build on them. And that's why you have this sort of mixed bag thing going on. Okay, part 3, checkmate. I talk a little bit about checkmate in here. And I talked about the lots we've already gone through. I asked about, well, what happened? What happened between, P&H? And it was kind of interesting because he indicated that they just don't talk to each other and we just don't mention it. We never talk about it. It really kind of made it sound like they had a falling out or something. And as of 2009, his dad was still alive, living up in Lake Lanier. Okay, so let's go back. Now we're in Sagamore Hills, visiting Howard Hardrath. The level of excitement was amazing. This is what his house looks like. If you look at it, there are a lot of elements here that you see in our homes. You can't tell, I don't think, about the brick, but it's that same recycled clinker brick that we have all over our neighborhood. It's board and batten siding going up to the side. And if you look at this, it's sort of like if you just cut it right here, this is a P&H split, but it's been extended. So this side over here is like 2 to 3 times longer. And there's a two-car carport here, and then there's a garage where you can park a boat. So this is really a massive house. Front door, same kind of elements. Notice now I'm going to get all architectural on you. Yeah, it looks really familiar though, right?
Yeah.
Beam, planter, door. The screen door, how many of those have you, there's still a bunch of them around.
I still have one back door.
Jalousie windows. So the reason they did that is because it was still mild enough back then that you could open up these windows and you could get airflow through your whole house and it would cool off your house. So you didn't have to have air.
And electricity was cheaper back then too.
This is the entryway looking back towards the front door. This was kind of interesting. It's like this built-up trellis that extends across the entry. You see that furniture? So this is what was interesting. All of the furniture in the house was the same from when they decorated this in 1955 or 56.
Wow.
And I think that what happened, I suspect that, when his wife passed, he basically just kind of kept everything, It was really interesting though because
That's pretty cool.
It's a chandelier.
I don't know if you can tell here, this is Pecky cypress. There used to be a couple of homes in the neighborhood that had Pecky cypress cabinetry. Of course, it's all been ripped out now mostly. You can see this trellis and then the fireplace. And that's Sam right there. Original Sputnik lamp. Isn't that amazing?
Oh, yeah.
Basement bar. How familiar does that look? Okay, so the interview. I had sort of a handful of questions that I had prepared coming in. I started with those questions, but as with anything, it kind of went all over the place. He was, I think he was 92. I think he was 92, or maybe he was 90. I think I've got it in here somewhere. He was right around 90 years old when we met him. He was totally alert. He was super responsive. He remembered everything. He had like one of those kind of memories where he could just pull out figures. That's how I have some of these details in here from my notes. So besides him, Sam Troutman, who I've already mentioned, and also Lori Gibson. So, I live on Lori Lane. This is the Lori that Lori Lane is named after. It turns out that the streets, Lori Lane and Kim Court, were his 2 daughters. And so those 2 streets were named after him, if you were wondering. So the story that we had heard about our street was that a little girl had died, and they named the street after her. I mean,
This is a better story.
So basically, he was in the finance room at Boomershine, Pontiac, and this was back in the 50s. Now, what was going on in the late 40s and early 50s is our economy had really ramped up at the end of World War II. And there was this huge need for a lot of cars. Like we had become like this car culture. And if you think about it, it's sort of responsible for all of the carports that were here. Because if you got a new car, you wanted to make sure everybody knew you had a new car, right? So you would park it in your carport. So everybody when they drove by could see your new car, So it kind of all works together if you think about it. The modernist position of our homes, the layout, the open carports, it all sort of fits in, at that with that same time period. So he was at Boomershine, Pontiac. He was kind of looking for something to do. He had heard about this guy, Paul Edwards, because I asked him, well, how do you meet Paul? and somebody in his office was sort of like a mutual friend, and basically said, yeah, I went down to meet this guy, and he was out in his garage building a boat, and it was just so cool, you know, like he didn't use those words, but it was just so interesting that he was so talented. He knew all of this stuff about woodworking and everything else that they kind of developed, you know, this relationship. And he told me the exact date, 1952, February 5th, 1952. That was the day they became partners. So, kind of interesting. I think I've already talked about some of this. Some of the things that he said about Paul that he really liked. Said, once again, that he was this really good-looking, kind of debonair guy, and that he was a genius. Like, he had come up with all of these construction techniques and ways of doing things that weren't shortcutish, but still ended up saving them money and stuff. So a lot of the things that they did, there were two things in particular. He said that one of the reasons these houses are so good is because of the eaves. Like, he said that over and over. He said the eaves in our homes are really extended. You know, they extend really far from the house. And you don't realize it, but it protects your home. It protects it from UV, it protects it from weather, it protects your foundation. It has all of these benefits that modern home building, you know, don't have, which I thought was pretty interesting. The other thing is the foundation drain at the footing. Apparently, prior to them kind of doing this, nobody was doing that. So if you had water that came up to the basement, it would just come into your basement. And some of you are already having water coming in your basements, but it's mostly because your foundation drains aren't well positioned or you've got water coming in somehow.
Well, everything has a life expectancy too, you know.
Are you guys bored yet?
No,
Very
right.
good, thank you.
When was the
Okay.
tan plant built?
I think right around the same time. Yeah. So they started building in Drew Valley in 1953. They ended up building 87 homes that year in Drew Valley, Humpty Hills, and in the beginning of Northwoods. I asked him kind of, you know, what about that partnership thing? And he was sort of like, he was confused by it, like he didn't remember it. And then he went, oh yeah, that's right, Walter helped us get some of the financing. So apparently he wasn't so much a partner because P&H predated, you know, this development, you know, by a lot of years. But I think Walter, you know, they just kind of had him down on paper in order to get some of the financing. And the other thing that he said was interesting, they built about 30 or 40 of the homes in Northwoods. Yeah, let's see. Oh, I kind of asked him, well, what happened with you and Paul? And he was like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, I heard you guys don't talk to each other. That, you know, was there a problem or something? He was like, no, but you know, that's just the way we act. We always act like we hate each other. We really don't. So I thought it was funny that from his perspective, there was no issue. But from Paul's son, Ray, he kind of perceived that there was an issue, which I thought that was kind of interesting. And then, this kind of explains how the neighborhood kind of, you know, is a little scattered in style, right? And I think I've already mentioned that.
Yeah.
He was basically parceling out lots, and you know, whatever of his friends wanted the lots to develop or whatever, and that's kind of what happened. And I think especially they were focused over here in that middle section of the neighborhood. They really didn't have time to mess with that. I think that those went to a lot of other, you know, different builders. And then once they started getting caught up on this side, they moved over to Northcrest East.
It just seems odd that, and I know you not know the answer, but that you know you have two sides of Northcrest basically, and then this whole other subdivision right in the middle, and it just seems odd that they would parcel out the middle portion instead of the far portion.
At that time, it was very odd in this area for a builder to even build this many houses all together and all.
Yeah.
So like the neighborhood I grew up in on Sunderland in Brookhaven, what's now Brookhaven, there were the developer did not build a house. The developer came in and cut the roads and made sure all the utilities got put in, and then they sold this house to Charlie, who's the guy that built our house where I grew up, and then they sold this house to Fred, and this
And
house
Charlie
to Tom.
might do 4 houses, for instance. And
Yeah.
then
I think there's only 50 or 60 houses in that neighborhood, and one builder might only do 5.
Right. They
And
sold
so
the lots basically.
The P&H, from when I went and looked down to look up our deed documents was like, you flip through the book and it's like P&H, P&H,
Right.
P&H, P&H, and that was weird. That was very, you go back a couple of years before P&H and that didn't happen.
Well, except for Northwoods.
Except for Northwoods.
And you know, once again, it's kind of interesting, and I think I talk about it a little bit. Well, let me finish up with this stuff. Let's see. He told me about where he got a lot of the materials, because I had a lot of interest in that. There was a cotton warehouse in Tennessee. That's where they got almost all of the brick for the neighborhood. They got the Douglas fir from out west, and that was one of the reasons why they started slowing down on the building, because it was becoming really expensive and really hard to get. So Douglas fir, the beams. That's all Douglas fir. Yeah, they're like these gigantic trees. No, it's not pine. It's Douglas fir. Douglas fir. And then there was a company that custom milled their tonguing roof. If you notice, it's like a 1/4 of an inch bigger than the stuff that you can buy now.
Yes.
And he said it was wild turkey lumber, wherever the hell that is. A little bit, just kind of about checkmate apartments. When you go and look, the upper floors all have tongue and groove ceilings. The carports all have tongue and groove with the metal posts. There's a lot of details over there. You all, if you're interested, should go over there and take a look at it.
Yeah, don't they have an A-frame too, like the main apartment center too?
Yeah, I'm gonna get to that.
Their clubhouse
Yeah.
is kind of into
I'll get to that.
Check.
And then in 68 and 69, the last company that they were involved in together was called Northlake Inc. I don't know what he did. He didn't really talk a whole lot about it, but I think that was right around when he was beginning to retire and everything.
So John, just tell them a little story about the pool at Checkmate Apartments.
Oh, I will.
Oh, okay, it's not there.
Okay.
Can't forget that.
I asked about the architects because everybody that's contacted me, I think half of the emails that I get are there any plans available? Do we know who the architects were? How can I get these plans, et cetera, et cetera? And I've always said, nope, 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 no, nothing. When I asked him, it was, nope, nope, don't know, nothing. Basically, when they first started, they would just buy their plans. It wasn't like online, but there were services. And they would use this, because these were builders. You know, they weren't really developers. When they started, they were builders. And then when they found something that people liked, they would have a set of plans, and then they would get one of the architects who really liked their homes and lived there to just alter them up and modify them and come up with whatever the design that they needed at the time. So he couldn't really give me a lot of names. I did, and I have Ernest's name misspelled there, but I talked to Ernest Maston, who's still alive. He still practices, and he was one of the principal architects for Northwoods. And he even says that some of his plans made it over here. So he did some of the development work over here too. And I suspect that he was one of them. What's interesting is when I finally did get my hands on plans, no names anywhere on them. The plans are just blank. Yeah, I'll show you one in a minute. The other thing that was kind of interesting, it turns out that Howard was a World War II hero. He was in the Battle of the Bulge, and he saved some people's lives. And so, you know, he was very well decorated, very highly thought of. And when you talk to anybody that knew him and have known him over the years, really kind of guy, one of those guys that was real social, just this fantastic guy, basically. So, you know, that's a good thing to know, I think. Okay. Here's Howard. So he died last year in October. He was 98 years old. I think that's a pretty long time to live. If you look at the obit, there's a ton of info in there about all of the grandkids and you know, who he survived by and everybody else. There's a mention in there of his brother Buddy. So I found out that, you know, when you're on Linray, there's a little spur off of Linray. There's one street right when you come in the entrance. It's called like Linray Lane, I think.
Yes.
That house that's on the left, it's this massive house, that's Buddy's house. And he lived there until he got too ill. I believe, from what I've heard, he had his leg amputated or something. I think he was diabetic, and his health just really went downhill from that point. But that was his house. So when we moved in the neighborhood, I believe he was still living there. So all of that stuff from that crazy email that I got from David is all true. That's what was mattered, right? And I just kind of read it. I was like, you know.
Well, someone told me that house was a
He's
crystal meth house for a
retired.
while too.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think some of you have seen this before. I was ripping out the planter in our house next to the sliding glass door. and I found this card. And it's an original P&H card. Yeah, it's kind of interesting, right? There's a brochure that's it was an original brochure. That's what we call it. This one was creased. I think somebody stuck it in their back pocket or something. And I only have a couple of pages, but I have all of this online if anyone is interested. Plans. So last year, Rick Lozano said, "Hey, you think anybody be interested in some plans? I've got the plans for my house." I was like, "Really? After all of this, right?"
I saw him in his basement and I
Yeah.
said, "You got to get these to John."
Now I repaired some of it because it was pretty badly damaged. There's lots of tears and stuff, but basically this is Rick's house, but mirrored. So same plan. Since then, I had got a second set of plans. I don't have any photos of them. But the second set were for a home that was the model over in Northcrest East. So it's the one right next to your house, to the right.
Oh, the one
Yeah.
with the built-in pond.
Yeah. It had the pond in it and everything,
Yeah,
the water
Rex and
feature.
Kathy.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Has any plans?
That built-in pond.
Okay,
That rocks in
the
it.
P&H legacy, 1958. This was an article about Howard's house, and if you look, there's those two chairs.
Yeah.
When you look at these details, they're all exactly the same. It's
Wow.
really like a time capsule. It's sort of an interesting article. Their new home was plagued by prowlers. That's because when they were building it, no one had seen a modern home, and while it was being erected, people would stop by and like check it out, and they would show up, and there would be all these people in the house. kind of interesting. 1963. When I said that Paul was living up at Lake Lanier, they bought 2 parcels of land right next to each other on the lake, and they built 2 A-frames. And Paul, and they sort of used them as summer houses. And Paul and his family was in one, and Howard was in the other.
Are they still there?
They're still there.
Awesome.
But
You
are
can see
they,
this.
did they look like that, or did they look like our homes?
This is what it look. If you look, see how this
Yeah.
comes off to the side.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
So this one is more like your house.
right.
It kind of comes off. This one extends out in the front, and then it has this sort of offset in the back.
Okay.
John,
I knew
where
they
are
were
those?
side by
Yeah, I love
side.
that.
I've got the address.
Are
It's,
they in like Gwinnett, or are they in Hall, or are they on the other side?
oh,
guess-
I don't know. I know the name of the street. We could look it up.
What's
I
the
love
street?
it. Saved it, yeah.
It's like
Are
We
they
should
on
have
the
a
water?
field
Deerfield or
trip.
something.
field
Like
trip.
10 cars.
People-
We're gonna have a
We'll
social
go around the
stalking
neighborhood.
field.
Makers.
Okay, 1963.
Kim and Lori, look
Oh.
at that. There's Kim and Lori.
Yep, there's Kim and Lori. This is an A-frame, like clubhouse, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And that used to be on their property, kind of out front, and he built it for his kids.
Aw.
Better Homes and Gardens. I didn't put the date on this, but it's 1966. This was an article published about building one of those little clubhouses. So he gives a simple plan, and he tells you how much it would cost you to build one. Pretty cheap.
Was that built,
Yeah.
John, was that built at the lake house, or was that built in the neighborhood?
It was up at Sagamore Hills.
Sagamore Hills, okay.
Is it still there?
No, it's
No.
long gone.
Oh,
AJC Home Finder, this is probably the latest thing that's been published. Brian Roboy had a little article in there about, it was just called Humble Beginnings. It talks about this huge structure that he attached to the back of his house. Okay, so now we're going to transition to Azalea Ridge. I think a lot of you have never gone back there and really looked at them.
I live by it.
You can kind of see a lot of the elements here, the beams. This is all tongue and groove, the metal posts. The railing, this motif you see a lot. In some of the pictures that I have of Howard's home in Sagamore Hills, it has the same railing. All the skylights. So this is part of the thing that was sort of interesting, because I asked Howard about it. He was like, oh yeah, Paul had come up with this way of pouring the walls flat. So they actually poured this as aggregate, like on platforms, and then they had these pulleys and stuff, and they lifted them up. And I had thought that this was all had been stuccoed, and I went over there, and it's not stucco, it's the same walls. It's lasted like 50 years, right? Isn't that amazing?
What is aggregate?
Aggregate's rock. Like when you look at concrete, if you wash off the concrete as it's drying, you get exposed rock, and they call that exposed aggregate. Split level. So remember that lecture on the ranch homes? There was a second lecture that Richard Clues did, and it was about the development of a split level, and we were prominently featured in that lecture. And he used a bunch of photography that I provided for him, from the neighborhood. So there's quite a bit in there. Entry signs. I thought this would be of interest to this group. It's the only thing specific to you guys. I was really interested in trying to find a photo of the original entry sign. Nobody took one that I know of. Nobody seems to be able to come up with one. However, I had this guy Michael Myrick, who was an original homeowner. He grew up in the neighborhood, and he did this rendering based on what he remembered. And apparently this was gaslit, so it matches up that count, right?
Really?
So it had sort of a planter, and it had this thing, it was all redwood, and it had a hanging sign. So we think that that's what it looked like. At least that was his memory of it. The other thing that he told me, he talked a little bit about that first house in the neighborhood to the right of the sign.
Gianna's house.
So Jana's house used to belong to Frank Vigo. And if you grew up in the neighborhood or in Atlanta, there was a Vigo Ford, and he had these real obnoxious ads. Anyway, he was one of the car buddies, and he heavily influenced the design of the house. That's why it has all the Asian motif all over it. And he bought a bunch of the property on the backside of the neighborhood. I guess he was one of the financiers or whatever. And at some point he donated that to the county, and they call it Vigo Field for many, many years. And then I think about 15 years ago they renamed it the Pleasantville Park. So he donated all of that. And the other thing that Howard said is they contributed the building over there. So if you, that little snack stand kind of thing that's over there, so they built that too. Sign number 2. You guys ever seen that? I don't remember who gave you this photo. I think it was Doris that gave me this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What year? Oh, in the 80s.
Oh, this one was, I'm not really sure. I think it was
70s.
80s. Yeah, it's 80s.
No, it had
This
to
is
be
very
80s.
80s, so.
Yeah, that's
It's not pretty at all.
And then the-
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of finish this off with a little discussion of the A-frame, because I always thought that the A-frames that we had here, I won't say that they were common, but it was something that you could find elsewhere. It turns out our A-frames are extremely unique. There are almost none anywhere else in the world, unless somebody has just happened to see these and copied them. They just don't exist. The way that ours are styled, where you basically have a flat roofed 2-story structure with an A-frame stuck on the end, that's unique. It's very unique to our neighborhood. So I had done an inventory of the A-frames. Does anybody know how many A-frames we have in the neighborhood?
12 if you 12 if you include those sons in the azalea, whatever.
Oh,
In the
yeah.
Anybody
apartments.
else? There's actually 13. So 1, 2, 3. Those are the ones on our side of the neighborhood. These are all of the ones that are over on Winray and Foxford. You can hardly see it.
Yeah.
That's a purple one with the dump truck front.
It's pink.
And now, are you ready? Has anybody ever seen that one?
That's the one in the apartment.
That's correct. This is Ray's house.
That's
And if you look, he added an addition.
Wow.
So it has a 3rd floor.
But that's the back side.
No, this is the front. This is the driveway. This is the carport.
Where's the front door?
You can see it in this picture.
Oh, wow. That's bizarre.
So to get that photo, I had to walk up the other driveway
Wow.
and hold my phone like up through the weeds.
Who lives there?
I don't know. I think it's derelict. If you go there, there's a. I don't know. No, somebody lives in this house, but the other house. There's 2 houses back there. There's a car parked over there that's covered like in an inch of dust, like it hasn't moved. I don't think anybody lives there.
The other house, though, it's not an A-frame.
No. And then now the 13th A-frame.
Really?
Can you tell? It's been uglified. You see the dormers, all the
Where's
everything
that?
right there.
Goodness.
This is the clubhouse. Somebody said earlier about the clubhouse. So what? Huh? That's Azalea Ridge.
It looks like she's stuck in there.
Now, the A-frame goes down to here, and what they've done is they've built all this crap around it. It's like they've crowded it. But when you look inside, see the tongue and ring?
Don't hold back, John.
Right?
Those are on the internet.
And when you walk over here and go downstairs, there's a big club room on the right, and there's a bank of windows along that whole side that open into the pool.
Oh,
And when we talked to Howard, he said, yeah, we got this company to quote out the glass, you know, for the pool. We thought it'd be a great idea. You could sit down there and drink beer and watch girls swimming in the pool. And then he was like, and we didn't realize that, no, that wasn't such a good idea because nobody would get in the pool.
right.
It's kind of funny. So if you look at it now, there's like a waterfall kind of feature.
Oh,
It dumps
okay.
water on that side, and all the windows are painted in. But I haven't been inside yet, but I'm pretty sure that the windows are still there.
How did you get that picture?
I held my camera right up to the
Camera
glass.
right
I think there's a apartment website.
Yeah.
too, where
Yeah.
you can-
Oh. Oh, is that the lake house?
Lake house.
Oh, the lake house.
Wow, are those louvered windows?
Challenges
Yes.
all the way up.
Galaxy
All the way
windows?
up. And on both sides too. So you have air coming off the water. Okay, my last slide. Is everybody still with me?
Herman's Fan Club.
Okay, these are just factoids.
Oh, my
Oh.
goodness, wow.
The president of the Herman's Hermits fan club used to live in the neighborhood. Mike Mills of REM, parents, used to live at 3663 Summit Ridge. We have a connection to REM. I'd always wondered if you ever go to Thai restaurant in Norcrest, there's a photo on the wall of REM that's all signed. I was like, well, what are they doing over here? Well, this kind of makes sense now, right? You're visiting your parents kind of thing. Members of the Atlanta Rhythm section. Apparently, some of those guys lived over in the Checkmate apartments.
Doorbell.
There's a little blurb about Vigo Ford, Frank Vigo. The other thing that's kind of interesting is the original sales office was a temporary structure that was A-frame. And at some point when they built the first model, they moved it, and it used to be out front of the dealership over on Buford Highway. So for many years, there was an A-frame stuck out there, and finally somebody, I guess, trashed it or something.
You'll have to update like the movies that they're shot now.
Yeah.
Carol O'Connor's grandson.
So apparently most of this property was owned by the Embry family. Kind of makes sense. It's Embry Hills. And it was mostly for cattle. So people have told me stories about all the roads being gravel and looking out the window and seeing cows in a pasture across the street. Like, you know that whole area of Beach Hill that's gone now? That was all pasture land. There was a pig farm, so if you lived up along between Thornwood and Northcrest Road, there raised pigs up there. And there's an old kind of trail, like almost like a wagon trail road that's up there. The kids used to go up and play.
There used to be a wagon trail road at the backside of the drive-in, and I used to take my four-wheel
Yeah,
drive
this
and
extends
drive
all the way down that.
all the way up into
Yeah.
just all rocks, and I'd drive up there.
It was a big.
I'll open it up for a Q&A if anyone has any questions or anything. There was a ton of stuff that I wanted to include. I didn't want to make the presentation too long. I have a bunch of info around the garden club. I figure most of you already know that. I have almost all of the pamphlets, for instance, for all of the tours.
John, did you bring any of the postcards?
Yes, I didn't bring any postcards, but I brought a bunch of hard copy type stuff because I thought you guys might want to view some of it. For instance, there's that plat map that Chris Bowen gave me. Here's the original article from Dixie Living on their A-frames.
That was given to us by Howard Hardrath.
These are all extra copies. That was the advantage of, you know,
Have you
actually
ever
going and seeing them.
you got them scanned in?
Yeah.
Got digital copies?
And then all of the different articles and stuff are in here, and there's all the brochures.
Yeah.
Going back to 2003.
Yep.
Anyway,
Very nice. Very nice.
feel free to take a look at that. Questions?
John, did the builders give you any ideas of what the original colors of paint that were used?
So, no, I didn't ask that question. You have to remember this was back in before anyone really cared about all of that. When you talk to a lot of the original homeowners, it seemed like it was a pretty consistent palette. There were a lot of kind of brickish red, kind of dark reds. There were lots of grays, like different types of grays, but nothing like all the gray that's in the neighborhood now. There was some kind of primrosy light yellows, stuff like that. but I think it was mostly pastels. You know, what we think of as modernism now, that bright orange door and all that stuff, that may have been popular on the West Coast. I don't know if it was ever popular here.
Springs, but not here.
No, mine was like dark brick red.
Yeah.
Our door when we moved here, which was in '78, was orange.
Okay.
It was a louvered door, but it was a bright orange.
Okay.
Wow.
That's unusual. So
Do you think the dark brown was original?
dark brown, probably not.
Yeah.
So you know, when we look at paint and you think about those really rich dark colors, those are really expensive paints to produce because of the amount of pigment in order to block out all of the light, you know, so that it would really cover. So I don't think that they were as common as people think. You know, some of the blacks, yes, because they use different types of pitch and stuff to make it black. But dark colors are really hard to get and be real intensely dark. If you think about it, you can't just add black to it. When you add black to a color, it turns it gray, brown. It makes it ugly. Yeah. Any other questions?
Can I say something? Oh, I'm glad I've looked at Facebook at 7:45 tonight. I have no idea this
Did
is
you miss
going
the
on.
whole thing? Or?
So, does anyone not know about the Heritage Preservation Program at Georgia State? Preparing an actual registered nomination?
Status.
Yes. So, that's happening unless anyone comes and says,
Oh, no.
no, I don't want it to happen.
Yeah, do you know the status?
So, we need you. Richard Laub contacted me last month, and now it's January. I'm like, oh my god, it's January. But the end of this month, the class is coming. They want to do a tour, a driving tour of the neighborhood, and I need a few people. And he hasn't told me yet how many students there are or anything, but I'm gonna need a couple people at least to like drive groups of students around just to kind of give them a tour of the neighborhood and tell them a little bit of history. And he wanted to do a couple interiors of a couple houses. I don't know if we could pick out a few different styles or whatever. Looking for a couple volunteers, but.
Now, wasn't there going to be like a history day where they try to accumulate?
Yeah, and then in February, he, well, you pretty much have everything, so I don't know if there's like any point in.
No, I'm sure that a lot of people have stuff that I don't have.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it out there if anyone else has anything, but,
Now, one thing I will mention that might be a concern to our club is they're going to be photographing all the homes.
I was gonna say,
or
should we clean?
They're going to be taking an inventory. So if there was ever a good time for us to just do a cleanup, like clean the streets if nothing else,
When are they gonna do that?
I think they're going to be around in
flew
February.
over here so
right?
fast, I didn't even look at my calendar. I
But
think
can you
it's.
give us a warning?
Well, I'm giving to you right now. But I think that we've always been really good about, you know, going around and cleaning up the signage and stuff like that. Yeah.
So the history night is like, history night's mid-February, I think, and we have to find a space. I've contacted the library.
One of the places I was thinking about is the people that own the golf range over here have a really big room upstairs, which is kind of nice, and they
They're kind of
might.
open late too.
Yeah, I could pop over there and ask them if they
We need
would.
a scanner.
How many students are we talking about?
I don't know, I asked them, they didn't tell me, so.
I think that room would hold about 60 to 80 people, and they already have a screen up there, so.
They offer,
They're,
No, she was just saying.
they've donated to the pool. They live in the neighborhood and they
right.
participated in the Atomic Dash race, so I think they might be open to it. So I'd be happy to ask.
And I'm sure we could give a donation.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, we already approved that. We approved the $300
Yeah,
or
we
whatever.
talked
for
about
that.
For the book, right?
Voted on it.
Pay for the book.
Yeah. That's to pay for one copy of the book. So we have to have at least one copy to submit, and we probably want a second copy, you know, for the garden club as part of the archive. I'm thinking.
but
Basically, anybody will
I'll-
show their house or drive around.
I mean, Paige, we don't want to show our house, but we'll drive around.
okay, so John and Cindy said they will show their house. John and Cindy,
You can get
Yeah.
with me later, so isn't like putting anybody on the spot.
You know, there was something that I thought of a minute ago, and I can't remember. what
Yeah, I
it
know.
was.
Are they-
Yeah, post two in the Facebook
Are
group
you
or
looking
the
for
email
more
list.
original?
Yes.
How about the A-frame? How about Debbie's house?
How about Virginia?
Who else has an A-frame here?
Debbie in Virginia.
Virginia does.
Okay.
I don't know who's living in Laura's house now. That's a fantastic A-frame.
Right,
Very
right.
original.
And they got a great 80s poke and pole kitchen.
Where is it?
Is that
Northcrest
Drive?
Drive.
Northcrest
Jen.
Drive.
Oh, I'll look to that.
Her name is Jen Kelly. I know her. I've
Yeah,
been out with
Jen.
That one's like really original.
Yeah. That's for me.
Sorry?
It's actually a beautiful little kitchen. It's just a real high-end European design kitchen. So the story behind that is she worked at, I believe, design with, she worked at
Maybe we can try to target that for next year.
House of Denmark. And she was so proud that they paid for that kitchen.
Wow. We can ease them into
That's
it.
really tough.
And I mean, at the time, we're talking about thousands and thousands for that kitchen.
What year was that?
It was in the 80s. I think it was 82 or 84.
So that's great.
Well, how's it different?
It's the one that's got the multicolored water line. So before I take this off, is there any other questions?
I think that's it.
Okay, bye-bye, thank you.
Thank you.